Greetings, friends! Welcome back to the Film Alchemist podcast, the show where we look at movies we love, break them apart, to find out what gives them their magic. I'm your host, Josh Griffey, joined again by my cartoonist who loves puzzles and co-host...
Definitely Alex Dandino.
That's right! The pod's still on the case. We're here cracking heads and gaining clues. We're like Scooby-Doo, but more hardcore. Guys, as always, if you like the pod, which we hope you do, please take a second, leave us a rating and review wherever you find the pods, especially on Apple Podcast app. That helps us out a ton. Find us on all your socials. Send us ideas with themes, movies specifically you'd like to see cover, things you'd like us to go to the theater. Well, we can't go to the theater anymore, but things video on demand you'd like us to cover. We got a ton of free time, so we would love to chat movies with you guys. So hit us up on socials, guys. And as always, you can now see our faces on YouTube. If you're, quarantined in, socially distancing yourself, you can still spend time with your pals, Griff and Dandino, virtually speaking, on our YouTube page, Nerd Alchemist. That's plural with an S at the end.
We're never socially distant on the web, guys.
That's very virtuosity of you. That's how that movie started. And then we got Russell Crowe serial killing. All right, guys.
Well, when you're...
But from virtuosity to a much lesser film, Zodiac. I'm just kidding. It's been my favorite thing is every week I take a couple haymakers at Zodiac just because I know people are going to get riled up about it. And, of course, you Fincher fans don't ever disappoint, man. You guys are like Bernie Bros. Like, you're just in it all the way till the end. Furious.
Wait. What is there to get riled up about?
If you ever... It's kind of like... I found that Fincher bros and Nolan bros, right? Like, if you ever talk about, like, The King, you can step in
Nolan
it a bit,
bros.
Right? Yeah, and I'm not at all trying to disparage David Fincher. What I was trying to say is I was really excited when you picked Zodiac. Right. So many people talk about this movie with such reverence. I even saw Guillermo del Toro's like, this is one of the finest films ever made. It's his best film. And I never really agreed with that, right? Like, it's one of those movies, I've seen it probably 5 times now. And I remember leaving the theater as a younger man just being like, what a waste of time, right? That was my first thought. Granted, if you know me and the movies I watch, right, well, if you know the kind of movies I watch, that shouldn't be surprising that a young Griff was like, where's the tits and the eating of humans? I'm not interested.
It's not surprising that an old Griff would say that, let alone a young Griff.
I mean, that's fine. But as I've gotten older, and I've actually watched this movie twice in the last year, for some reason, I don't know why I watched it before, but we had been talking about doing this. I've come to appreciate it much more, but there's always something that feels, there's some kind of disconnect I have with this movie. And even today, it's just, there's something that just never all the way sits with me. And I think I'm
really
full
glad,
circle
by the way.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I love that my choices for this month, by the way, you like, except for that one thing that just makes it unwatchable for you. Probably my favorite month we've done so far.
That's not what I'm saying.
It's the best part about, like we watched Brick, and now this one, and it's all you. Every time we've talked about it, like, it's great, except for this one completely unwatchable thing that's just it makes it nearly impossible to finish the movie.
Okay, first off, no, it's because you pick good movies, all right? Like, quote-unquote good movies, as critics would say.
I wouldn't go that far.
And I'm like, all right, movies that take themselves more seriously and this and that, like, let's use the more critical lens, right? Whereas something like this week, I found one of my new favorite films, Hell Comes to Frogtown, right? It's Roddy Piper in the post-apocalypse has one of the last working dicks that can impregnate women. So he has to go with a woman, like, military group to free women from a mutated frog village and get them all pregnant. And I was like, yeah, I don't care what this movie does. I'm in 100%. I love it. Right. Whereas some movies, they want to be serious. So I look at them as they want to present themselves. And I love Brick. I just think Brick being in high school is a terrible fucking decision. But I still love Brick. And this is the thing. Sure. Today, I really appreciated Zodiac for so many of the things it did. But I don't know what it is. There's something that just does not click with me. Right? We talk about it on Letterboxd, right? You give it the stars for what you think the movie is, and my 5th star is a bit arbitrary, right? Half of the 5th star, if you want to be a perfect 5-star movie, will I watch this movie again willingly? The other half is, does it have that magic feeling? This movie to me still doesn't, and I think I figured out why today, and I think it's maybe just a filmmaking choice that we almost never see, which is this movie so specifically puts you in an unsatisfied position. And there's not really a way around that, right? So the movie, I think it's one of those things we never see a movie that's just okay with, hey, we're going to work you up to this fever pitch and then just go, eh. And I don't think that's a flaw. I think it's how the movie had to be told, right? Because I think a lesser director would take this movie and say, here are specifically, yes, this. Give us the Zodiac monster we crave, and this movie doesn't do that.
Well, I think a lesser director would have just remade Dirty Harry. Like, Dirty Harry's fine on its own.
Yeah, right?
I actually, and I'm not saying that Dirty Harry's a bad movie, by the way. I want to be very clear about that. I like Dirty Harry. I
didn't realize that was a Zodiac-inspired movie until I saw that today. I was like, oh, yeah, shit. It's like just one of those weird things that washed over me.
Well, it's interesting too. Like they like bring it up real briefly in the movie, like at the very beginning when Graysmith sees Dave Toschi for the first time. When Jake Gyllenhaal sees what's that? Now I don't know the actor's name. When Jake Gyllenhaal sees Mark Ruffalo wear his guns on the outside, he goes, "Whoa, he wears his guns on the outside like Bullet." He goes, "No, Bullet took that from him." Yeah. Like I've actually read a lot about Dave Toschi. Like he was a very fascinating cop, and that's exactly who Dirty Harry is based on as well. Yeah. So, like again, in a lesser, I wouldn't say lesser director, but like there's another accent to this movie that takes place strictly in the realm of law enforcement. Now, the difference is, and the reason this movie is interesting is because it isn't a traditional detective movie, but like Robert Graysmith takes it upon himself to kind of like become his own, like basically solve the case himself. Yeah. Like not necessarily for anyone else, but just for himself. It becomes this like personal mission. It's very interesting how it all unfolds.
Well, yeah, and I think that's what I was appreciating more today is it's such a I still to this day, honestly, other than just the power of Fincher and like people wanting to do what he did, this must have been such an uphill battle to get the green light on this. Because it's a serial
the script was 200
movie.
Pages long.
Yeah, that's what. But it's a serial killer movie where you get so little of that kind of serial killer movie, right? Like the guys like me who watch a lot of that kind of stuff, this is not that movie, right?
Sure.
And especially, it's so funny to watch it in the context of today, where we're all true crime junkies, right? And we know all of these procedural things and how evidence is gathered. And so it's this hard, I think it's one of those things in my mind where it's having to adjust your preconceived notion of what you want the movie to be and just sit there and enjoy what it is. Because it is not kind of a horror series. It's not Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. It's not about that character. It really has very little to do with Zodiac at all, in my estimation.
Well, again, like, this to me, like, the power of the movie and the thing that makes it so fascinating, particularly as not just a detective story, but also just as a movie about a serial killer, is that this isn't Henry. Like, the point of the movie is that whoever this was, and again, they've never solved this case, but whoever this might have been, literally for 3 years running, like, he's son of Sam'd the entirety of, like, the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah.
Like, everyone was scared. And I don't, like, that's the best part about this movie is it focuses so much on, like, the psychology of the general populace and the psychology of the police officer, psychology of the people in news, like the true nature of what fear can become, like what we're all experiencing now, the true nature of like what mass panic can be,
dude,
is really what's on display here.
No joke. Being in like self-isolation, you know, my wife's a nurse and this and that, so it's a little extra scary for us this time we're in. Watching it in that lens of just this omnipresent thing that none of us fully comprehend and are afraid of was extra terrifying today. So I'm with you on that. What I think this movie does so well, too, though, is it walks this really interesting border between... There's this kind of banal element to the killings, right? Like, I didn't realize this time, they so take the piss out of what Zodiac is and was. And it's always... every scene, to me, feels like we're bringing down the myth of what this guy was. And then it's punctuated with an extreme act of violence. Because this is the weird thing, right? Like, I was thinking about it, and there are movies where you get, like, your Hannibal Lecters or Dexter's a famous serial killer, where they catch you, they have a method, they've got their grandiose speeches. Hannibal Lecter, like, can quote any book, all that shit as he's about to eat you. What this movie does in the scenes, like, the scene that jumped out at me most was when they're at the lake, right? Oh, yeah. So it's two couples just out on a picnic. Here's this kind of schlubby guy who looks like he's dressed as the Black Knight from Monty Python, right? And just this dumb, ill-fitting outfit who's like, hey, tie yourselves up. I'm serious. And it's just, they don't even take it, right? Like, I think the guy who, as he's getting tied up, the boyfriend's like, hey, man, just before they ask, like, is that gun even really loaded, right? And then, so you're doing this whole thing of, they're getting, it's a public park at day. It's going against every kind of horror movie, madman trying to kill you concept that your brain wants, right? And what it does, it puts you in this, it reminded me a little bit of what they talk about with the movie Halloween, right? Where what separated Halloween at the time and made it so scary. It wasn't a camp. It wasn't a castle in the middle of the mountains, with lightning strikes everywhere. Michael Myers existed in your home, right? In the house that you recognize, killing people that you really could relate to. And so by putting this omnipresent, killing machine in your home, in your neighborhood, in your small town, it became scarier. And what I think this movie does is that's just a couple out in the middle of nowhere, right? And the whole thing is just Zodiac is kind of a clown, but then he starts stabbing people, and you're like, oh my God. So the whole scene is dismantling. It's not ratcheting me up with a sense of like, wow, this is scary. You're just like, what a fucking, like, look at this fucking moron. And you're like, but then when he starts stabbing him, there's this intense moment of violence that kind of snaps you back to, oh, fuck.
Right.
It's really interesting, pulling act.
Right. I mean, I like that though. Like, I like the lack of mythos.
Absolutely.
Like, to break it down so like, kind of like almost academically. It's kind of strange. Like, and again, so much of this, like, I was reading a little bit about, like, James Vanderbilt, who wrote the script, like, spent a lot of time, like, speaking with Robert Graysmith and poring over case files. So, like, a lot of the things that happen, particularly the crime scenes, are very much to the letter as they were described by the victims. So, to me, the benefit of this movie is, A, demystifying, but you're onto something, though, when you say omnipresence. Yeah. That, to me, is probably that's the thing that actually is the scariest part about the movie. And, like, there are 3 or 4 scenes in this movie, one of which, when we talk about it, legitimately has never stopped being scary to me. And you know the scene I'm talking about.
We'll talk about it.
Like,
Go on it.
Omnipresence is such an important thing about this, like, entire movie. Like, from Lake Berryessa to even, like, the cab scene, which is shot in this awesome, like, that Grand Theft Auto style up until, like, the parking point. I'm like, this is a really weird choice, but I'll go with it. But honestly, the scariest scene in the entire movie, and the thing that, I mean, I remember I actually saw this with our friend Preston when we were in college. Went to the theater to see this. I looked behind me in the theater because I was so nervous during this scene. It's obviously, like, there's a lot of foreshadowing and a lot of history that you have to know to get to this scene, but basically the scene where Robert Graysmith chases down this gentleman who claims to have worked with the Zodiac, or the person that they believe is the Zodiac. This guy who kept a film canister for the guy who they think is the Zodiac down in his basement. Now, if you live in California, if you live anywhere else but California, you would know this, but California does not have a lot of basements because we have a lot of earthquakes. So this guy's like, yeah, I have it down in my basement. And Robert Graysmith's like, there's not a lot of houses that have basements. And the guy who, I don't know if anyone else has seen the movie Genius on the Disney Channel, but he's the guy who is the other professor who hangs out with the main character the whole movie. he just literally turns to Jake Gyllenhaal and goes, "I do," and fucking walks down, and that sets off like one of the creepiest scenes I've ever seen in a movie, where it's literally just the heightening of tension, the dark saturation.
What about that scene scares you so much?
It's honestly just it's the omniscient nothingness. You don't know what's going to happen. You're like, is this guy going downstairs to get murdered right now? Like, you have no idea really. Like, it could be that thing. This guy could just be like a kindly old weirdo, or he could just be like one of the most like famous never solved mass murderers in history. Yeah. Like, you go down into this basement and like you are put like for the whole movie, we're kind of like put in this position of like omniscient narrator, where we're just sort of sitting back and watching the case unfold. This is the first time in the movie where we're ever in the driver's seat with Graysmith. So to be in his shoes, Jake Gyllenhaal's also phenomenal in this scene, by the way. But to be in the shoes of this character who's like, I'm not a cop. I have no backup. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I might get murdered. And you're in a basement that's like shot really well. And then like you think about all the things you like, because I think about like at night, even here, like we live in a pretty safe neighborhood and we live in an apartment complex, and I hear creaks all the time. And I'm like, is that someone in my house?
Yeah.
Like I've legitimately gotten up at least 3 times before and like walked around my apartment because I swear I could hear people walking around. I'm like, it's no one in my house. That's like the level of fear that is instilled in this scene of a movie. Like, so if you've ever had that feeling of like, is someone in my house? That's just in this scene of the movie. And it's really kind of like a great climax to the whole thing, because this movie, you're right, it does end very like, meh, never solved. You're like, okay,
yeah,
well, that sucks.
And I think if they had gone for like, oh, we're going to definitively solve it for you and focus a lot more on Lee, or, you know, because that was Graysmith. Is it Graysmith or Greystone? Whatever, Cartoon Boy. That was his deal in the books, is he fingered, you know, Lee and was like, that's the guy. But that's what that's kind of the beauty of that scene, right? And why this movie works so well is, like you said, all the things you said are set off upstairs. Where he's like, here's this lowly old creep. And he's like, oh, well, we got handwriting, dude. We got him on the handwriting. He's like, that's my handwriting. And all of a sudden, Jake's like, oh, fuck. And he's...
Right, like the bottom literally drops out.
And the old man doesn't go for him. He's like, come to my basement, what feels creepy. And the moment that it really hits for me, right, it's kind of a double impact in that beat, which is, one, Jake Gyllenhaal has all the thoughts you said, right? Like, I'm just some bitch-ass cartoonist. I have no gun, no weapons. I didn't grab like, you know, a wooden mallet from the kitchen drawer, nothing. But he still fucking went. Because he has this obsession. I must see. I must look. I must find it out.
I have to know.
Right. And then what they do is, once the guy's like, oh, yes, we did play that movie in May. And he slides into the shadow. In the shadow-covered face is how we always see the Zodiac, quote-unquote.
Right.
That, to me, was the moment I was like, oh. Because what they did is they took a guy who, now we can see him. We don't know. They slid him in to the shadow, and it's a perfect visual of, now he could be Zodiac in our minds. And what's extra fucked up is he runs out of the house and escapes, whatever. Within 5 minutes of movie time, I think, we're pretty much like, oh, that was all bullshit. Like, that was all wrong. It's this other guy.
Right, exactly.
Like, so, and that's the beauty of that moment, is it's this tense, fraught, oh my God, I may have solved it. It could have been 2 killers. And just minutes later in movie time, they go, nah, fuck that. And that's what was so scary. And that's why you have to adjust. This is not a Madman movie. But it's what the fear of a madman does to us, right? And I think what you said, too, is we are in this kind of like, it's a very predatory camera in this movie, right? We are just watching these people who are essentially other Zodiac victims, unnamed, right? Every main character we follow's life is worse off because of their pursuit of the Zodiac. Right. And so it turns every scene almost, as we just watch these men ruin their lives and marriages and fall apart. It's like, oh my God, we're watching someone get slowly dismembered by this boogeyman, the Zodiac. It's fucking, I mean, that's what I latched onto this time, is I think as a younger audience member, you want the more exciting, thrilling, here's the madman, here's the bad guy speech. And that's just not what this movie is, and I think greatly to its benefit.
Yeah, I think that had there been an ultimate bad guy, that would have really sucked.
And they did go pretty much like right up to the line of like, we are pretty sure this is the guy.
Right. And I mean, again, this is like very specifically based on because the story is Graysmith's, obviously it has to follow his ultimate conclusion, which is that Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac.
But this is one more thing before we move on, and this is the absolute brilliance of this setup too, is God, I can't remember the character's name. Minkus from Boy Meets World, who grows up to become one of the McBoyles, right?
Yeah, Michael Mageau.
Yeah, so Minkus to McBoyle, right? When they bowl him in, like,
to McBoyle.
Yeah, hey, let's look at the pictures. Even when he immediately points to Lee, he says, but he had a face like this guy. Points to another one, and the cop's like, are you saying it's... No. I'm saying like him. How sure are you? 80%? But then he's really resolute, right? So that last scene is a perfect capper of we all so desperately want to specifically identify the thing that is most scary to us. Right? And that's what this movie is watching people just take wild leaps to try to rid the world of a faceless evil.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it is. Like, I think that's the benefit of it being sort of this like obscurely detective story is really what it's about is, I mean, it does all the things a detective movie is supposed to do, but what it does is take it a step further, I think, and talk about the obsession. Like, if you're a detective, like, here's the thing. Private investigators, detectives, these are people who are not cops. Mm-hmm. They are maybe former police officers, but they are now like work for hire people. So their job has to be obsession. So this movie takes that a step further and be like, what if you're not a cop? Mm-hmm. What if you're not a PI? What if you're just a guy who wants to know?
Just a cartoon and
how
Boy
far
Scout.
are you willing to take it? Yeah. What if you're just a fucking tuned up Boy Scout? So you're going to just like take it all the way to the nth degree. Like your obsession with knowledge is what could kill you in the end.
But that
I think is probably, that is what I think is the best aspect of it.
Right? Why does Graysmith need this so bad? Did you ponder that at all in the movie? Like, why did he get caught in the web?
Oh, I think about it all the time. I mean, like, they bring it up, I mean, effortlessly. Again, this is earlier in the movie, they bring up earlier in the movie the bar scene between him and Robert Downey Jr., who, by the way, Robert Downey Jr. was still on the uptick from, like, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang when he did this movie. He's fucking amazing.
Yeah, he's really good.
It's awesome. Granted, I mean, like, now it's all like old hat. We know how Robert Downey Jr. does his thing now, but like this was early on, and he's so good.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
He's just so wonderful. So the scene in the bar where they're sitting there drinking their Aqua Velvas, which is hilarious, and like when he's like, "This can no longer be ignored. What is this drink?" But like they're sitting there talking about it, and he literally is like, "What's in this for you? What's the deal? Like, why do you?"
This is good business for everyone except for you.
This is good business except for you. Why?
Which is God. That's such a fucking bone chilling way to phrase that too.
Yeah, but again, like he doesn't have an answer. And really, like when you think about it, Graysmith doesn't have an answer throughout the movie. He just has to know. Like it's the pursuit of knowledge.
Yeah.
So you have to wonder, what is the pursuit of knowledge? Why does it, like, at the cost of what? Like, think about it. He's went through, when we meet him, he's already divorced. Mm-hmm. He gets married again and has babies, and then he gets divorced again. Mm-hmm. So throughout the course of his life, he loses so much in the pursuit of the knowledge of who is Zodiac. Yeah. What is it worth? That, I think, is probably the best part of the unanswered question of this movie, which is nobody really knows. Like, is it worth it? Do you need to have that knowledge? Should you be pursuing this knowledge any further? Like that, the thing is, for us not to have a definitive answer means we get to come on podcasts and talk about what I actually think, which is honestly like, I probably would have said that's not worth it. I think probably like you're like, I'll tell you right now, after I met that fucking guy in his basement, I'd be like, I'm never looking at another fucking thing about Zodiac again.
I was like, why not just jump that dude and beat his ass and be like, give me your movie books. So there was, but that's just me. But that's what I think is so fun about watching, because it is like, it almost feels like the movie's about to wrap up, right? We haven't gotten letters in a while, and then it almost does a quick reboot, and it's almost like we start a shorter, like 30-minute movie with Jake Gyllenhaal ramping up.
Oh, totally.
There is this. I think that's the part that is so unusual watching him is this man who just he's a good guy, right? He doesn't drink. He doesn't smoke. They always say that, a Boy Scout. But he's a fuck up in a lot of other ways, right? Like he's a shitty husband and a shitty dad, it seems like. And, not that he couldn't be good at those things. He just won't put his time there, which is the most important part of being a husband and dad. If, we know that. We live that life.
I do.
And that's the thing I never settled on is he's so determined to do this. Because I was like, it's not just to impress Paul Avery, because he, that doesn't seem like it by the end. But he just wants that moment where he gets to go stare Lee in the face, have the police detective say, good job, you figured it out, and stare Lee in the face, knowing full well that he might be wrong and it doesn't matter.
Right.
But
that scene is so...
giving every single thing up for a, just like a fucking false trophy at the end was so...
Yeah.
It was gut-wrenching for me to watch, honestly. I was just... And I think that's
that scene
what the
is
movie
so
leads
fascinating.
you, is you have to be in the headspace of these three men who lose everything, right? And it's...
Yeah.
Sometimes people are just evil and they get away with it. And we don't always get the dirty, hairy justice, right? It's just,
right.
And I think that's a weird place for a movie audience to be in because so few movies of this ilk let it slide like that, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think that's probably the most engaging and fascinating thing is that scene, yeah, you're right. It's gut-wrenching, but that's like the most interesting part about the whole movie is that we get to the end and literally you have to sit there and you say, that's not the answer to this story. There is no resolute answer. Like, he just knows in his heart of hearts that that's who he feels is the Zodiac.
And I was doing some Google research, and again, not like deep research, but, I've looked up this kind of stuff before. I dabble in serial killer information.
Right.
I'm pretty sure... based on, a genetic profile they pulled off one of the envelopes a couple years ago, that's not even their main suspect anymore.
No,
a lot of the police are like,
him.
no, we still believe, we won't clear him based on that. But pretty much people are like, yeah, that's wrong. You guys got it wrong. You wanted him bad. And that's what's,
right.
It took me back to that. So you watch this guy give up everything. And then in real life, you're on Google and you're like, fuck, he got it wrong. He got it wrong.
Yeah.
We watched this whole movie.
Right.
And he got it wrong.
And
so Lee escaped the punishment that we wanted him to have, and he might have actually been innocent. He had other crimes, but not this. That means the real Zodiac is still... that's... The movie... I think it's one of those things, right? Younger me super turned off by it, but I think the leaving us in limbo perfectly captures what it must have felt like to go through something like that. Because I've never been involved in there's a serial killer, I'm afraid.
Well, I think the most about Dave Tosky's probably the best character to remain in limbo. Graysmith got his resolution. The thing I always think about though is Dave Tosky, who was a famous police officer. Probably, and if you read up on him a little bit, he's one of the only police officers who's he's one of the people who people are based on, like Popeye Doyle, that kind of shit. He's a police officer that people base characters for movies on because that's how he was.
Which is funny because I would argue he's the most boring character in this whole movie.
Oh, no way. I think his partner's way more boring. But I think
you got me there. Goose is way, way more boring.
Goose has got problems.
Fincher's on set. He's like, this Ruffalo character's not popping. Get me Edwards. He's the fixer of, not popping leading men.
But see, that's sort of the thing though, is so from this guy, because I think about Mark Ruffalo is a great actor.
Absolutely.
Before he did Marvel movies, he's done other wonderful pieces. And that guy transforms himself a lot of the time. So my question is, because this is a guy who went out, met Dave Tosky, all that kind of shit, and actually Ruffalo said in an interview, the thing that's most impressive about Dave Tosky is his ability to remember everything from each crime scene.
Yeah.
He has basically a photographic memory, so he knows all these things. So if I'm thinking about that version of Dave Tosky as being played by Mark Ruffalo, Dave Tosky probably was not a very interesting police officer. He's probably just a good cop. So the version that we get from Dirty Harry is strictly Clint Eastwood, short of I don't know,
but that's
wearing your guns out.
Yeah, the way you watch him in this movie is a guy who's so obsessed like that, right? Who can never let it go. Do you think he's probably super fun at a barbecue, or do you think he's still like, there was 3 bloody tits in the corner of that room. What does that mean? You know what I mean? So it's like, and this is before, this is what struck, is like, this is before forensics, right? It's like my friend Nick, like one of his favorite John Mulaney bits is he's like, do you know how easy it was to get away with crimes like 100 years ago? He's like, you just had to not be there, right? And so like detectives would show up and be like, Captain, and this is a Mulaney bit, right? Where he's like, Captain, we found a pool of blood and semen. And the captain would go, ew, gross, wipe that up. Now back to my hunches. And that's what this movie was. And so you watch this guy, Ruffalo, who's just hunching it up, right? Doing the work. But you see him fudging at the edges, right? Like trying to get a new handwriting expert, trying. And it's, you just watch this guy who becomes obsessed. And he has the line in the movie that I think is my favorite line in the movie and sums this up perfectly, which is Gyllenhaal tracks him down outside of court, right? Like, now Tosky's gotten busted down out of homicide because he got accused by Internal Affairs of writing the Zodiac letters himself to drum up press, right? Which we learned later cleared up. But Gyllenhaal's just like, help me. And he's like, fucking stop. I'm done, right? You see this, like, broken guy. He's like, I fucking can't anymore. Probably because it fucking actually hurts him, right? And he just says, the Rick Marshalls of the world will fucking drain you dry. Not fucking. I think I added that. The Rick Marshalls of the world will drain you dry. And that is exactly what this movie's about, right? Even when they go, because it's kind of, again, it's infuriating in this true crime era to watch parts of this movie. Like when he goes and finds Betty, whatever her fucking name, painting party girl's sister in jail. And it's like, no one ever fucking brought her pictures of suspects. She never got to look at a picture of Lee and say, yeah, that's him.
Right.
Like, that fucking drove me. I was like, ah! But you're like, that's what it was like for guys like Tosky. So you're so committed to the job. But, and that's another thing this movie does exceptionally well, is it shows you the clunkiness of how that would have happened. Like, if you just cross lines for 4, or county line for 4 crimes, that scene when, Goose is like,
I was just about to say, when he's on the phone and like, we'll telefax it over to us. We don't have telefax. Well, then I'll mail it.
We really should have been on this. Oh, well, and I was just, you just want to fucking punch a hole in your screen. And again, this movie is always, you always have the specter, right? Because it's one of those movies, too, where we have so much extra real-world information that we know all of this is for nothing, that when you see Anthony Edwards trying to fucking get this task force going, you're like, oh my God, you had to do that job and it didn't lead you to jack shit. Like, it's so stressful to watch.
Right. I mean, that's like the best. Again, this movie does such a good job of the detecting. Like, it's about the detecting and, like, honestly, the failure of it a lot of the time. Like, I think that's something that
almost
is also
exclusively failing. That's the fucked up part.
Well, and I think that's something that people forget a lot of the time because we now live in this era of, or not live in this era. I'm sorry, that's a stupid generalization. But like, we like a happy ending. We like, we like a bow on top. That's part of life.
We want the bad guy to be caught. We want the hero's journey.
Of course. And I think that's the best part about like this one, is particularly detective movies in general. The ones that I like don't end like that. Like, I like detective movies that our detectives don't get like a resolute ending out of it. Like, things don't necessarily go exceptionally well for these guys. And also, a lot of great detective movies have people who are terrible at being detectives a lot of the time. Like, nearly garbage. Like, look, Brendan and Brick might be one of the worst detectives of all time.
Mainly
because he's in high school.
Yeah, he just got his first pubes, and he's like, oh man, it's hard to detect with all this extra itching I have to do in my crotch.
But like, we're no longer in that. But this is great because it is about how exceptional people who, Paul Avery was a infamous writer for the Chronicle. Dave Tosky, famous detective. Robert Graysmith, now famous writer, but nothing cartoonist for a long time. And then all of these men not only like became so obsessed with this that it literally destroyed them, but on top of all that, like it became such a huge part of their lives that not only to destroy them personally, but to destroy their careers in the eyes of other people.
Yeah.
Like, other people stopped wanting to work with them simply because that was how they were known. Like, I don't know about Graysmith. He was a cartoonist. I'm sure he was fine for quite a long time. But nevertheless, imagine
he
being a
lost
guy
his
who writes a
job
book.
in the movie as we're watching him like on the case. He lost his cartoonist job.
Right. Well, imagine being, and not only that, the thing that I always think about, particularly regarding that last scene, and it's interesting you bring it up, with him going into the hardware store and seeing Arthur Lee Allen, is like, imagine being the guy who writes a book and says, I'm accusing this person based on evidence that I've collected. Mm-hmm. Like, that is still a scene where and I agree, it's gut-wrenching, but I just cannot fathom being that person. Like, it's shocking to me.
Well, I mean, it's the thing this movie does where it turns our detectives, right, our heroes, into the kind of predatory serial killer mindset. He is tracking down his prey the same way that Zodiac would, maybe even more so, right? And so at the end, he has chosen his victim, the one that will, give him get his rocks off. Like, serial killers pick people because it, fills whatever. There, the 3 or 4, right? There's the torture, the power. There are different kinds of serial killers, right? And so their victims fulfill this psychological need, right? And so Lee becomes that for Robert. And so it doesn't matter if he's right or wrong. He has gotten the psychological hard-on that he is so desperately chasing in the movie. And that is a really terrifying admission of the movie. Which is these guys so desperately want it to be one guy. And even as the audience, who now knows that, the genetics have also not, implicated this guy. Every piece of evidence you want to say this guy probably did it and your guy's old-timey handwriting and thumbprints were bullshit, they've still never been able to find anything to link this guy to it yet. I still can't fathom that no one has seen pictures of this and said, I was also at the painting orgy party, and that was him. Like, it feel like I found a picture of Lee online or what. You're like, it's crazy to me, but this is where we're at. So knowing that they didn't catch him, right, and that might not be him and Zodiac still out there, now we are watching these guys just kind of torture this guy who, is maybe fucked up, right? He was a diddler, so he's not a good guy.
Yeah.
But, he lives in a trailer full of fucking squirrels, whatever that was. So you're like, not doing great. His own family's trying to get him arrested. And they're like preying on him now in this extra, he made a mistake, so now he's in the system kind of turnaround. I don't know, man. I think that's what becomes fascinating, right? Because the scene to me that nails it home is Paul Avery in his boat, right? When he shows up and he seems happy to see Robert, but immediately it brings back the Zodiac shit. And I think he says it. He's like, he was just a guy that killed a couple people, wrote a couple letters, and faded into history as a footnote. And you see Avery in that moment saying, fuck, I lost everything because of this guy. And he's a victim of a death threat, right? And then he found a body. It was traumatic on top of his substance abuse problems. But you see him now despising himself that this is what he gave it up for, right? He sees the Zodiac as a not worthy cause. And it's strange that a movie does that to us, says the boogeyman of our movie is just a guy who killed a couple people. Like, that is a crazy scene.
But that's what
movie.
it is. That's a great scene in the movie because it does sum up what this is. Like, it's about the boogeyman.
Yeah.
It's about obsession and about the worst. It's the worst instincts we have on display. Especially as people. Like, you think about that.
Yeah. But that's what's crazy. I was thinking about this as I was watching. It's like, it happens to me almost every time. Like, I get so amped when I see a new serial killer documentary, right? Like, I still am like, where's the amazing John Wayne Gacy movie, right? Like, I've seen some on YouTube. But every time I see these guys,
there's a Zodiac series on Netflix right now about a guy who claims that he knew the Zodiac.
Well, there's a guy who said it was his dad, and the picture's like fucking bang on. But
dead on, man.
But you look at these serial killers, and I'm always like, oh yeah, man, fucking, the Dahmer Files. I turn it on, and you're like, oh, he only killed some people, and it's so crazy how our minds are like, oh, he only killed 13 people. Yeah, you say that and you're like, huh.
Yeah.
You're almost disappointed because you're like, he's not as bad a guy as I thought. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're like,
well, I mean, like,
it's crazy, but that's how it is we look at that and we're like, huh. Not like if you met a guy and he's like, yeah, I cold-bloodedly cut someone's head off. You'd be like, holy fuck, I got to get out of here. This is the worst guy in the universe. But from afar, we just hear like, oh, he has they have 5 people they think the Zodiac actually killed. And I remember being like, wow, the Zodiac's that big of a deal? He killed 5 people. And that is what is fucking crazy about this story. And the movie does a good job of like, here's the radio talking about Zodiac. Here is this talk show doing their Zodiac segment, right? And they turn it into this fucking mad circus, and it makes him so big that it actually kind of shrinks what he did in a macabre way, right? It's scary to think that 5 people isn't that many, but that's how our brains work.
It is, but like, again, like I was saying earlier, like the fear that it instilled in the world, like the small world of like the San Francisco Bay itself, that's the real, like, that was the real danger. That's the real thing that it did, was it scared the shit out of enough people. Like, I mean, Jake Gyllenhaal has that great scene where after they don't put the letter in the Chronicle, but the letter where he says, I'm going to pick off the little kiddies as they come off the bus.
Oh, yeah.
Like, where he runs up to the school bus right before he's like, I'm going to drive him today. I'm going to drive him. It's fine. Like that. That's fear. What it is. Like, it's about instilling fear, and it's about the fear that grips us, about the mass panic that it can cause in general. Like, that's really kind of like the thing that made the Zodiac himself interesting. Not the amount of people he killed; he just simply threatened it a lot. Yeah. I think the reason
he
this
took
movie
credit
is
for
so
all these fucking other crimes too that we know he didn't do. Again, the movie showing us behind the scene, dismantling him as this great boogeyman. Right.
I mean, I think the thing that makes this movie to me, because again, I agree with Guillermo del Toro. This for me is an all-timer. Like, I've always enjoyed this movie, and even at 2.5 hours, I'm still like enraptured, which is pretty shocking these days. But that is that this is such a great convalescence of all these great pieces of filmmaking. Like, David Finch is a great director. You have a great cast. You have a great summary of your mission, which is simply to tell like a story about obsession. That's really kind of like what this ends up being about. So to me, I think like Zodiac stands alone in the way that it approaches for our purposes the detective story, but also does a really good job of, again, demystifying who the Zodiac was, but more who the Zodiac became for other people.
Right. Well, you see that we've created this boogeyman, and you see people whose lives are ruined by it. As you watch society move past it and not give a fuck. It's this weird stacking of, we should be really scared, but they're making us more scared than we should be. These guys know how dangerous it is. They want to solve it. But San Francisco moved forward, man. Like, after, 4 years, they're like, all right. Like, he's a footnote. And I was thinking about this because I think today might have been the day that maybe this was just the right environment for me to finally, like, it's all kind of clicking for me more. But it's, you're reading online. Like, we're all kind of trying to self-isolate. A lot, like, movie theaters are shut down, restaurants. Like, we're in a really weird, unprecedented, scary moment, right? Like, I've been alive for 35 years, and I don't remember anything like this, right? Like, where the whole world is just saying, we're shutting the fuck down, right? Whether it's been weather or, when we were, I thought I was getting drafted when 9/11 happened. I was a Midwestern kid, a senior in high school, and I was like, well, I'm getting drafted into World War III. That's just what I remember thinking, like trying to get amped up, like, all right, we're going to war, fuck yeah. But even that, life moved on, within a couple weeks. And like, even that day, you were still able to go to the movies and shit. Right. But like, I remember them pulling the Spider-Man trailer out of the movie theater I worked at, and you're like, that was crazy. This is so much more. And what it struck for me today is that this is not a serial killer madman movie. This is Contagion. That's what this movie is. The Zodiac is this unknown thing that scares. Like, you can get online today and people are like, I'll be fine. It doesn't matter because I won't get killed. Like, oh, man, we might lose a couple thousand people. Like, I've heard people saying that online, like, well, coronavirus might, like, 2%, come on. And you're like, fuck, dude, in 9/11 and those, attacks, I think we lost less than 3,000 people. But I don't remember it as like, oh, that's not very much. I remember it as like the day that my life changed forever, right? Like there was an after 9/11 life I was leading. And that's how people talk about that and Zodiac and this, Corona scare is like, that's not very much. It doesn't affect me. I don't care. And that's what made it so scary to me today is you see these guys that they can't shake it as the rest of us don't give a fuck. And the fact that Zodiac was just out there. And after the 4-ish year span of this movie, probably was still out there, right? He might have been incarcerated. He might have died. He might have just gone on to, like, just be among us. This fucking thing that we were so scared of. And that's the scene in the movie, too, that struck me as the most haunting, is when he asked the cab to drive him to a rich neighborhood to kill the cab driver, seemingly to throw off the pattern, right? Kind of a creepy, that's a weird thing to do anyways. But the way he just fucking walks off into that neighborhood, he just fucking walks off. And again, that takes it back to Halloween. That's your neighborhood, right? The movie's saying, that's where you live. And that guy just fucking strolled down your street and into the night, and he might still fucking be there. And that's what, I don't know, today, like, everything just clicked here. The movie became way more scary for me today than it has been in the past. And I think it's just that, maybe I just needed to shift my brain a little bit. I still can't, to this day, I can't peg where the disconnect for me is. Why I don't love it as much as everyone else. I appreciate it so much. But you're like...
I'll be honest with you. I don't know many people who... Like, people who know this movie love it. Again, I don't know many people who... There's a lot of people who don't know this movie exists still, which is weird to me.
Right.
Because David Fincher's become, like, such an important director and such a big deal. I actually think this is his best movie. There's a lot of people who think it's The Social Network and a lot of other movies he's made. Seven is also very good. And actually, I didn't know this. David Fincher was the only choice to direct this movie because of Seven.
Right, it makes sense. But that makes a lot of sense. When you watch that in like Mindhunter, you're like, that's him giving me the serial killer where I get the bad guy. And I think he's so good at that you're like, I want Seven again. And that's just not what this flick is, man. And it's weird because, I don't think my mom would remember this movie or care. I know she saw it, but I'm sure it's not like a movie she'll ever think about again. But, we travel in like film circles. We do a film podcast. We went to film school. We work in the industry. So, like, we know the people that are upset. And those people talk about this movie, like you said, all-timer. And so that's why it's always... I hate when people love movies, and I'm just like, I don't... Why? Like, why? And Zodiac's been on that list for me for a long time. Today, I got a lot more out of it than I ever have. But, yeah, I mean, there are just scenes that are really much more haunting to me today than they've ever been. Right?
Makes sense.
Like, even the first scene, right? Like, him just driving up on Minkus and what's her name? Girl who's willing to sleep with Minkus, right? So you're like, alrighty, they're making bad choices. That's classic horror movie. You make bad, dumb choices, you get murdered. And there is just this... It's just so plain and simple, right? He just rolls up. He just has a flashlight. And he just starts fucking shooting them. Out of nowhere. Right? And you're like, that to me... wasn't scary in the past because I'm more used to like a classic bad guy. But today I was like, fuck, man, what if that just happened to you? What if you were just parked? Like, I grew up in the Midwest and, my parents weren't about to be like, use your room to go slap some titties around. You scamp. So like, that's what we did. We'd go park in cars and like, try to get down. And you're like, fuck, that could have been us 1,000 times. And yeah, I think that's the thing this movie does is it lulls you into this, it's not that bad, punctuated with, holy fuck, back to guys trying to solve it and people not caring. And I think that's what's scary, is it makes the terror something that's just in the air.
Well, it makes it real. Yeah. I mean, again, like, that can happen, like, the way that happens. It's not churched up movie stuff.
Yeah.
That absolutely probably, I mean... Given the amount of research that was done for this movie, that's probably almost exactly how that happened. Like, probably 95% exactly how that happened, which makes it that much more scary. Like, there's no music in those scenes. Mm-hmm. It's simply a murder.
Yeah.
And, like, the starkness of it, that is what really haunts you.
And again, like, seeing him in his schlubby, like, Black Knight from Monty Python costume, punctuated with, oh my God, he stabbed that person like 15 times. Those, that's what I mean. It's such real fear. And imagine back then, they didn't have social media to stay worked up. Like, you can say, like, our cycles are faster, right? Like, a school shooting happens and we're all revved up, and like 2 days later, we don't care. But in this, it's, they didn't have constant media all the time. Like, once the news stopped covering it, gone. So I don't know how much more afraid they were back then than now. I would assume more. But, man, I don't know. That's what dawned on me, is that Paul Avery moment to me really fucked me up today. He's just a guy who killed a couple people, wrote a couple notes, and faded into a footnote in history. Like, that's a fucking terrifying summary of what that guy, one of the guys who was most in on this case, knows more about it than most people. That's how he summarized this thing that we still mythologize and are making a movie about.
It's the cost of obsession.
Yeah, man. It's that really fucked me up today. That really fucked me up. But that's all right. We know who did it. Read it in our best-selling novel. The pod doesn't take the case and not do the legwork. No, just kidding. We absolutely didn't. All right, guys, that's it for Zodiac. Actually, I should ask, do you have anything else? Anything else that stuck out to you needed to get to?
Nope. It's on Netflix. Please go watch it. It's very good.
That's right. All right, guys. So, again, that wraps up Zodiac. The pod is still on the case, though, for one more week. The greatest detective movie of all time. The Golden Child with Eddie Murphy. Very important to my personal backstory. Being a chickenpox survivor, locked in a bedroom eating ketchup, hot dog, and mac and cheese bowls, not being able to play, and just watching The Golden Child for like 3 days in a row, 8 hours a day. Very personal to me, but it's the best detective movie, and I'm going to lay out a case for you next week, guys. That's our final detective movie.
Given the lockdown we're on, it sounds like you just laid out the case right there.
That's so weird. When I watch it to prep for this show, I will be as close to I was as a chickenpox kid.
You better eat ketchup, hot dogs, and mac and cheese.
We used to make Kraft mac and cheese, cut up 2 hot dogs, drop that in a bowl, cover it in ketchup, mix it all up. Po-folk food. That's what we used to eat. It was delicious, though. It was delicious. Not as delicious as The Golden Child, though. And I'll be doing that next week. Guys, we're also going to be recording The Invisible Man. That is going to be on demand this Friday. Universal making the enormous decision to release some of their now playing in theater movies as video on demand rentals Friday. So, if you want to watch Invisible Man, you can still do that. And we want to talk through it with you. I saw it and fucking loved it. So we're going to do that. We've got some other stuff. Who knows? Maybe now that we're shut in, maybe next month we'll do 2 themes for us. Who knows how much entertainment we're going to need. But again, guys, you can always reach out to us, man. We're here for you, and we're here to talk movies. And I know it's fucking scary out there, and I know Zodiac's a fucking scary movie in this time. But, I think we're all going to pull together and get through this, man. We'll be okay. As always, leave us a rating and review, especially on Apple Podcast app. Find us on Nerd Alchemist on YouTube. That's plural with an S at the end. And, hit us up, guys. Are there movies that you want to hear covered while you're in lockdown, man? We'll try to
give us
do
a
that
theme.
for you. Yeah,
we'll see.
Hit us up with a theme, a double feature, things you found on your apps or on video on demand. We'll get there. We watch movies. We like that.
Ooh, also, for those of you who do not have Shudder, Shudder's offering a free subscription for 30 days while you're in lockdown.
Right. Code shut in, I believe. That. Shut in.
The code is shut in. Just go to Shudder and log in. Use the code free subscription for 30 days. Get on it. It's
just
awesome.
Another example of why that is the best app. So get that. All right, guys. For the Film Alchemist, I'm Josh Griffey.
I'm Alex Dandino.
Prepare. We'll see you next time. Get golden, pony boy.